It is the final evening of listening sessions at 180 Studios for me as part of my residency here that we've been doing for the last year and a half. I think this is the 39th sold out session that we've got here, which has been really special, kind of a beautiful space to explore a number of different themes from, just kind of some of my favorite artists like Pharoah Sanders, who I sense we're going to hear a little bit of today, to people like Jah Shaka, to the history of Pakistani cinema vinyl, to more classical themes and reggae-based themes. Today we arrive at spiritual jazz. And I kept thinking in the preparation to it, am I sure that we've not done this yet? Because, we've done women in jazz, we've done vocal jazz, we've done Pharoah Sanders, we've done Sun Ra, and there are kind of a lot of intersections that kind of chime with today's theme. But it's a really special one. And I'm really excited to spend the next period of time going through it. I actually wish we had like 2 days to do this session because there's so much incredible music to really get into. It's spiritual jazz. It's a very interesting era of sound, and it's a very interesting theme because it's slightly ambiguous. Essentially, it is one of the themes that really expanded the world of American jazz, taking it away from kind of more theoretical foundations such as bebop and hard bop and post bop, and taking it somewhere a little bit more abstract, a little bit more, for lack of a better word, spiritual, connecting to something slightly more emotional. So we're going to get into all of that, and I'm going to share some more stories with you. But to start off, I think let's just get into the music. And I'm going to try my best to chronicle the stories and the development slightly alongside the development of sound. So it only makes sense to start off with this, the Sun Ra Orchestra, the Nubians of Plutonia. Whatever you read about spiritual jazz, whatever you read about the pioneers and the people that really expanded the sound and pushed it forward, amongst other things too, it always tends to come back to Sun Ra as somebody who was doing something way before the others, whether that was developing modal progression, incorporating electronic music. Many say that he was the first to ever incorporate electronic music in the world before Lee Scratch Perry did, 7-8 years before Lee Scratch Perry did, and was the first person to really influence hip-hop rhythm as well as punk. And a lot of it comes down to this record. It's called the Nubians of Plutonia. And it was recorded in 1958, and I believe it was released in 1959. Sun Ra was born in the South, in Louisville, Alabama, and he was kind of part of that great migration. Born in 1914, ended up coming up to Chicago. It was in Chicago that he was playing with a lot of the pioneers of swing music, such as Fletcher Henderson, who was a great mentor for him. And it was through that he ended up meeting this man called Alton Abraham. Now, Alton Abraham, if you Google him, will say it was Sun Ra's manager. He was an entrepreneur. Basically, I'm a proper nerd about this stuff, right? So I went to Chicago this year and spent a few days in the University of Chicago studying a lot of this, which I can maybe tell you a bit afterwards. And also last year, went with my friend to Philadelphia to trace down the living members of the orchestra and to try and get into the mystical, famous Sun Ra house that they've lived in since 1968. And we did it, and we got there, and it was mental. But what I ended up finding out through this were a few secrets about Alton Abraham that apparently I'm not allowed to share, or my life is at threat, and a gangster told me that. But essentially, he was a bit of a gangster, and he was a really fascinating man that was slightly involved with the Chicago mob, but that kind of gave him the power to have this kind of financial, foundation. And when he saw Sun Ra's music, there was just something about Sun Ra's approach, his sincerity, the discipline within which he wanted to employ the music, that made Alton Abraham totally gravitate towards him to form a partnership to actually create the record label Saturn Records, which answers the question that I had when I arrived in Philadelphia as to how were all of those records financed when you had this kind of man living in a house with 16 people in a very rootsy way, yet he was able to put out so many of these records. Where did it come from? And the answer ended up being Alton Abraham. So there's a lot more behind that guy. But it was when Sun Ra met Alton Abraham that they actually had the first conversations about not just Pan-Africanism, but ancient African philosophy, that Sun Ra ended up getting enamored by the history of Egypt and essentially named himself after the god of the Egyptian sun. And so much of the music that was the first to break out of that classical, theoretical, American, Eurocentric mindset was from Northern Africa in Egypt, and Sun Ra was the first to do it. So that really is a foundational part of the spiritual jazz journey, but this was a few years before all of these records, I'm pretty sure. Which one should we play though? Yeah, all right. I'm just going to play my favourite one, isn't it? The Golden Lady, but I always play this one, but I just love it. And I guess, like, before I play it, listening to the percussion, it's the percussion in this that is some of the most innovative, and Sun Ra really was the first person to bring together more than one drummer in a jazz band and play with that idea of polyrhythms, which is now something that, you look at jungle music and drum and bass music, and you've got all these rhythms going against each other, sound system culture, dub music. Nobody did it before this guy. So this was 1958. And the maddest thing about this is that Marshall Allen, the man who's on percussion, certain forms of percussion, the flute and the saxophone, he's still alive and he's still playing. And he's the oldest living performing musician in the world. And he's 101. And he lives in this house in Philadelphia, and we went to go and see him. And he still smokes, which is mental. And he's got a girlfriend who's 68. But yeah, all right, let me play this. Anyway, welcome along to the Spiritual Jazz Special. favourite Sun Ra songs, and kind of one that just sends you into a complete trance. And it's just incredible to think that that was made in the 50s, and kind of within it, you can hear these amazing imperfections too, that feel like they're not polished, but they still feel quite deep, as if they're tapping into something really sincere. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing Marshall Allen, who's now 101, on 3 occasions. And one of the things that he first told me when I met him in New York was that when he first met Sun Ra in 57, 58, bear in mind at that point Marshall Allen was already 33 years old in 58. He said to him, you know, so what do I need to learn? And Sun Ra was like, you just need to be disciplined, you need to tune into this. And then when Marshall Allen was playing, he was like to Sun Ra, okay, so how do I make sure that I don't play mistakes? And Sun Ra said to him, I want to hear your mistakes. When you make a mistake, play that mistake with your heart and turn that mistake into something special that will blow me away, that I didn't even know was possible with what I envisioned this music to be. You know, show me something. And I think that's a metaphor for life as well, you know. We're so preoccupied often to execute the plan, which is often great. Often it's a great plan, often it's an ambitious plan. But the older I get, the more I recognize it's human nature for curveballs to be thrown, for obstacles to come up at times where you've got no one to help you work out but yourself in certain moments. And often in those moments, when you give it everything, something cool comes out of it. That's something that I've really found, especially in performance. Being an artist, it's slightly precarious craft, and there are loads of different things that I'm trying to do, but it doesn't always go to plan. But it's about turning those mistakes or those curveballs into something special and showing up with your chest and being open. And that's what I felt Marshall was saying to me about Sun Ra. So when I listen to that song and I can hear almost those mistakes turning into something cool. You know, there was one moment where it felt like the drum beat actually messed up. That could be the first ever example of broken beat music. Do you know what I mean? Because everyone followed the classical theory, and then broken beat music that was an offshoot of jungle is now a sound that people go to see. You know, I was at this talk the other day at Mason and Fifth, and it was like there was this workshop for 18 to 25-year-olds who just made jungle music, and these kind of jungle pioneers were listening to each of the sounds and were giving feedback, and it was like Brian G and DJ Crust. And Brian G, legend, said something about the fact where he was giving a kid a piece of advice, and he was like, be bold, be radical with your music, like create something that doesn't even fit within the constraints of what we know. And they mentioned an artist who I forgot, and they said that when this guy created distorted bass, everyone thought he'd messed the track up. And so the labels that he'd sent it to, they all sent it back to him. They were like, mate, you sent us, you didn't kind of quantize the track, you didn't properly, mate, you got to redo that and send it back. And he was like, no, that's how it's meant to sound. And now Brian G was like to the kids, imagine drum and bass now without distorted bass. But he was the first to envision it. So I think that there's a real magic in remembering that, and I think that's what spiritual jazz and the philosophies that underpin it really represent in terms of the beauty of the unknown, really. And at a time where there's so much information, where I'm finding it quite overwhelming with the online, AI is just getting intense. You know, remember it used to be like this random little kind of 2-letter word that was just, now it's everywhere. And so, you know, even like spiritual jazz, I was doing obviously some research, but first thing on Google is like, you know, the AI and spiritual jazz, just complete juxtaposition. Was a bit helpful though. But you know, we've got to be aware of it. We've got to be aware of it, and we've got to remember that especially moments like this, gatherings like this, and sounds like this, are so beautiful because of the humanness that's in every single one of us and connects us all. So yeah, it's amazing. Sun Ra, I love you. And also we went over to the house. I met Marshall Allen just before he turned 100, and he signed that for me in his bedroom, in his boxer shorts, which was jokes. He did have a t-shirt on as well. But I just felt like I really shouldn't have been in his bedroom. It was just like, I was like, this is slight invasion of privacy, but he obviously welcomed us in. So yeah, really special that, and that's an amazing record, but I think that was 76. 78, 78. But yeah, that is actually, if we're looking at electronic music and hip hop further down the line, that's still spiritual jazz for me, 100%. Pretty much everything that Sun Ra did is, but this is just something crazy. But obviously we haven't got time to play everything. So this is really fascinating. I mean, look, we're going to talk about John Coltrane, of course, because he's an essential part of the story, if not the most essential part of the story. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But before we get into the Coltrane, Pharaoh Sanders world, which is actually the main world within this all, in my opinion, we can't overlook Yusef Lateef. And it's really important that we spend a little moment just to play a song off this album, which I believe was recorded in 1960 and released in 1961. And Yusef Lateef, this Blues for the Orient, this was a really important album, because you've got to remember that when people think of spiritual jazz, they're thinking of the Ornette Colemans, you know, the Don Cherrys, the John Coltranes, the Sun Ras, these kind of like really intense forces of musicians, these vessels of sound and spirit. Often the slightly more sensitive sounds from within that, you know, the Alice Coltranes or the Dorothy Ashbys or the Yusef Lateefs can be forgotten. And Yusef Lateef was really important because he was essentially one of the first of a swathe of musicians within America, black musicians, to convert to Islam, and essentially saw that as an opportunity to represent and find pride in his own black identity, and to kind of break out of the American world and the American way of thinking of things. And this was kind of at a time where Elijah Muhammad was introducing the Nation of Islam, which was offering a lot of kind of literature and philosophy to black people all across the country, in amongst the civil rights movement, to find a sense of pride of who they were and to break away. So Yusef Lateef was actually one of the first to do it. He did that in the 50s. And so suddenly it was that kind of converting to another religion, converting to Islam, that opened his mind in the way that he played music. And he was one of the first players to actually start looking over towards Asia and Africa as sources of inspiration to inform the sound that he was creating, beyond just the Eurocentric approach to sound. This record encapsulates that, and let's play a tune, isn't it? I got this. Actually, it's funny looking at this this batch, because so many of them are from the same record shop in New York, Human Head Records, best record shop in the world for me, and I say that with full chest. If you ever are in New York, go to Human Head Records. It will blow you away. It's the kind of thing where it's like, if this legendary collection lands in a London record shop, and then like they'll put it in their window and they'll like, you know, have it all up there for $1,000 or whatever each. It's the kind of thing where you go into Human Head and you'll be like, you know, what's in your new arrivals? They're like, yeah, this guy who like, you know, is a Blue Note executive engineer just dropped off his collection yesterday. Have a look through the box. It can get quite expensive in there, but you've just got to strike a deal. Travis, who runs it, he finds me really annoying. He says that I ask too many questions about what the music means and where it's come from. And he was like, why can't you just listen to the sound? But he used to be really angry, but now he's chilled out. But he was like, you remind me of just one person. There's only you and one person that always, I was like, who? He was like, just you and Giles Peterson. You always come in here and asking all about the history. I was like, I'll take that. But he's great actually. And he knows his stuff about the music, but there are some expensive bits there. It's just something, you know, when you go and you just look at the wall and you just see a record that's like $900 and you'll be like, what's that? And then he'll be like, that's a Sun Ra original 1 of 1 test press. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like, I wish I could buy that right now. That's why this is an addiction. This is completely an addiction. That will ruin my day that I can't buy that. But, you know, small motivation to make sure that one day I can. Okay, so I'm going to play a song called Ching Miao. Oh, I should have looked this up. I don't know what that means. Does anyone know what that means? Ching Miao? Cool. Well, it doesn't sound American, so it's part of another world, and probably that Eastern, philosophy. Obviously, East is quite broad, but there's something about that sounds more East Asian than South Asian. So yeah, let's give this a spin. This is a beautiful, beautiful song. Yusef Lateef. Beautiful. And, you know, slightly different to the Sun Ra record in that you can tell that obeys the theoretical approach to the music that was being made before, slightly more. It's kind of taking that bebop sound and that slight swing, I guess you could say, in there, and making it something new by kind of incorporating these new instruments and using the saxophone in a different register and playing the flute, which, you know, already was an instrument that, you know, through its sound and the way that it was being played, really echoed the feelings and the emotions of other parts of the world. So, you know, this was a really significant shift that was happening in this moment, and nobody was kind of more important within this, in this history and this story, than this fella. Oh, wow, no way. I've never opened this up. Look at that. John Coltrane, absolutely beautiful. That, and that's Pharoah Sanders. That's a very, very young Pharoah Sanders up there, who must have been 20 there. And in the second photo, you've got the amazing double bass player, Jimmy Garrison on the left, and Alice Coltrane on the right, sitting down next to him. And then at the bottom, you've got the drummer, Rashid Ali, who is another incredible percussive force who had also converted to Islam and was using that to inform stuff. It's beautiful. There's got these, oh, look, there we go. Oh, no way. Why did I have that on? It looks cool, but it's not as cool as this. Look at that. That is the Village Vanguard in New York. And you've got John Coltrane standing there. I can't believe this is in colour as well. This would have been 1960. And on the left of him, very, very young, shy-looking Pharoah Sanders, which is a partnership that basically changed the world of music in the time they played together, but also the time after John Coltrane passed away. You know, nobody left more of a mark on jazz music in history, more so than John Coltrane. I guess one could argue Sun Ra, but I guess the one thing that everybody agrees on was Coltrane was perhaps the most influential in the way that he played and the feelings that he evoked. The thing that people can often forget when we're seeing, you know, these legends pass away, and Pharoah Sanders passing away at 81, Marshall Allen still going in his hundreds and all of this stuff. John Coltrane passed away just after he turned 40 years old. And it is completely insane, you know, to think that if Coltrane was alive now, he'd still be younger than Marshall Allen. And he passed away almost 60 years ago. You know, so just to understand the sheer impact that he had in the short time that he was here is so incredibly important. Listen, some of these tunes are like so long, and I don't like ever cutting them short, but the Spiritual Jazz Special is gonna be the one where we can't just play a 25-minute tune, unfortunately. I don't know if I've ever actually played this. Look at the condition of this record. This is insane. This is an original. I actually found this one in Cafe Otto, which is also a great place to find cool records, although pretty expensive, but it's always worth it. You never regret an expensive record. And yeah, there's some beautiful notes in here. And yeah, so this, I'm gonna play a bit of Naima, which is a song that John Coltrane wrote. This was recorded in 61, but I'm pretty sure he wrote Naima in like 56 or 57. And Naima was the name of his first wife, who was also a Muslim convert and lived with him in Philadelphia for a few years, from about 1952 to 1958, or 54 to 58, in this 3-story house in kind of central Philadelphia, just after John Coltrane had come out of the military, where he was kind of, he was one of the sax kind of band leaders to boost morale in the American, I think it was the Navy. And he was so good that he actually became the first local black band leader for a military army in that part of America, which is another overlooked fact. And yeah, they lived in Philadelphia. And when me and my friend went over to Philadelphia last year on this kind of adventure to go and find the Sun Ra Orchestra obviously we had to spend an afternoon going over, or finding, because it wasn't easy to find, the old Coltrane house and spending an afternoon paying homage there. And some mad stuff happened. So I'll tell you what happened after, if you want to know, which you probably do. So yeah, this is Naima, which he would have written whilst living in that house. And this would have been in the late 50s as well, moving towards 1960, a very important time in Coltrane's life. So I'll just play it from the beginning, and we'll play a few minutes of it because it's like it's a 20 odd minute song. It's actually sad to cut that short. I'm sorry, that feels wrong. That actually sounds amazing on this sound system, can I just say? It sounds a lot more tricky on the old earphones to listen to that. It's a lot kind of, I knew it was a bit of a free track, but I didn't know it would sound like that on this. It's weird. That's a lot warmer than, because when you're actually listening to the frequencies that they're playing and the intensity at which they're playing, you really need a sound that's able to kind of facilitate that if you're not in front of them. And I don't know, when I was just sitting here, I kind of felt like Coltrane was right behind me playing that. It was so crisp. I wish he was. I bet he kind of is. But do you know what I mean? But yeah, that was unbelievable. That was Naima live at the Village Vanguard. And I made the error of saying that was performed in 61 and recorded before that. It was written in 61 and performed in 66, that in New York. And he'd played that a few times at the Village Vanguard, but that version was performed in 1966 with his then wife, Alice Coltrane, on the piano that we just heard. But amazing record. John Coltrane, Jimmy Garrison, Alice Coltrane, and Pharoah Sanders there. Playing there. And of course, when we're looking at John Coltrane, he essentially was the first person to really break out of that world of, I guess he was in the world of modal jazz beforehand, but he'd essentially been a massive force in every sound that he had played. Coming from that massively influenced by that era of bebop jazz, and people like Charlie Parker, and the swing element, and people like Cannonball Adderley. Coltrane stepped in, and he was essentially kind of like the greatest force to continue to innovate in every kind of way, kind of like, I don't know, like, if there's, I don't want to say Ronaldo, like Cristiano Ronaldo, but like Ronaldo, even love him or hate him, and he is a bit annoying, he was amazing in loads of different leagues. So it's like, he can actually retire and say, I did it in the Premier League, I did it in Italy, I did it in Spain and Saudi, but whatever. But do you know what I mean though? And I think that's kind of like, there's a great legacy that's left by artists that are committed to be not just incredible in one place, but to go and do it. Like, for example, Shabaka Hutchings, who is kind of one of the greatest, I'd say the contemporary Coltrane, but for him to put his saxophone down 2 years ago and say that I'm not playing the saxophone again, he's just picking it up again now, but to dedicate his life to the flutes and to kind of master the craft of learning the intricacies of the breath work of all the different flutes and spending the last 2 years going to all these different countries and picking them up. Nobody does that anymore, because we're in a world where we're all trying to do everything a little bit. And me included. And I can't help but have a lot of respect for the people that just decide that that's going to be their thing and they're just going to focus at it. And once they feel like they've done it, it's kind of like division of labor, isn't it? It's like there are two ways of making it. You can try and do everything a little bit forever, or you can just focus on one thing, make it happen, smash it, and then move on to the other when you think you've kind of completed that. So I never thought I'd say John Coltrane and Cristiano Ronaldo in the same sentence, but here we are. And I can actually kind of see the crossover, but Coltrane over Ronaldo any day. But yeah, so essentially when John Coltrane was in Philadelphia and he was living there with his wife Naima, in the 50s, kind of 10 years before he'd performed that, because you've got to remember as well, that was performed in 1966. That is, the very kind of peak of the civil rights movement in terms of so many riots that were going on in America, and this kind of, really painful desire for rights that the black people pled for across the country. And were not listened to, and so that manifested in an impatience, in an anger to be heard, and a lot of that was reflected in the music. So when you're listening to that sound, that's not just a sax being experimental, that is John Coltrane reflecting the black sentiments of the time, the pain, the yearning, the screaming. That's what I'm hearing when I'm hearing him play that. And so that's the thing with free jazz. And this was a huge issue in terms of these musicians, is, we've got to remember, this wasn't the noughties. This was the 1960s. And the dimension in music that had a huge amount of power were the media. And the media and all the critics were white American critics who were often reviewing black music, you know. And there's nothing wrong with that until the empathy goes and the compassion isn't there and the patience isn't there and the desire to learn isn't there. And people are writing without considering those things. And that is what, of course, was happening in America. And so when these musicians decided in the 60s that they were going to move away from entertaining crowds and focus on expressing themselves and connecting to their roots and their identity, it was then that these critics didn't understand it. That didn't sound good to them. That sounded like they were playing wrong. And so suddenly you were getting some of these incredible records that were getting, 1 star in the Rolling Stone or 2 stars in the New York Times. And so people would look at that and they'd say, that's not good. That's why we have to give so much respect to these people. Because at the time that they were living, they were not being heralded with the praise that we can now give them retrospectively. And that's such a reminder for anybody doing anything, whatever world, not just art, business, tech, being a doctor, being, if you want to be a visionary in whatever craft that you're in, then don't listen to other people if you truly believe in it. But we're in a time where there's so much distraction and we need a bit of validation every day, whether that's online or whether that's something, that we're losing that tunnel vision artistry and craftsmanship that changed the world. And so that's why it's so important to remember that when we're creating or when we're, writing in our notebook or shutting away the world, because the world's so loud right now, work out those dreams and be your own best friend and stick to that dream against all odds. And if it's tricky after 6 months, keep going and see how you feel after 2 years, And that's the feeling that I get when I study these people and when I listen to them. And that's why this is always such a great gathering, because it's nice to kind of share those thoughts a little bit. Also, if anyone's got a thought at any time, feel free to just contribute, isn't it? This is like a communal room. But yeah, I don't know, man. This stuff makes me a bit emotional. I can't lie. Especially these sessions. It's such a special way to connect with audiences. Like being a DJ, you're always up there and you're playing, and there are loads of people in that, and it's cool. But this is really where the essence is, in this kind of. And on the topic of communion, I'm going to come back to that because it's really beautiful. But what I was actually originally just saying to you was I was telling you about Coltrane in Philadelphia. And what ended up happening is when Coltrane was in Philadelphia, Miles Davis enlisted him to his band, and he was part of the famous Miles Davis, blue and green modal jazz pioneering band. And it was in that band that Coltrane, like Charlie Parker a few years before, became addicted to heroin and drinking. He was completely addicted to it every single day. It was informing his playing, but that was the state of him. Miles Davis said one day, I can't have you in my band anymore. I'm going to have to kick you out. And Coltrane was in a complete shock. He thought that this was his life, this was his partner, this was his inspiration. And Miles said, I'm not playing with you in the band because you're not a good example, and it doesn't feel right. And so Coltrane left, and he was completely lost, and he didn't know what to do. And so he was in his home that he lived in with Naima and his cousin, and I think his mother as well. And in his home, he locked himself into the second floor rear bedroom, and locked himself in there for 2 weeks, and told them that if they wanted to give him any food or water, they didn't have to, but just leave it outside the room. He was not leaving that room, and he wasn't going anywhere, and he was not going to leave that room until he kicked his heroin addiction, because he could not handle the idea that Miles Davis had kicked him out of his band. 2 weeks later, John Coltrane, in that second floor bedroom, had an outer bodily experience where he said, in his words, something like, by the grace of God, I was summoned by a heavy spiritual force that told me that what I needed to do was use music and recognize its capacity to be a form of communion and happiness. And if I can facilitate that, then I can give people purpose and I can give people happiness. And he said, that's all I need. And he looked out of his bedroom that faced onto the railroads, the rail tracks, and saw the train going from Philadelphia to New York. And in that moment, said, I am going to New York and I'm getting out of Philadelphia and I'm taking my career from here to here. And he went and he did it, and he never did heroin again. And he'd kicked the addiction. And that was the Coltrane that then wrote Giant Steps, that revolutionized, which I had, but I didn't bring today because I couldn't actually fit it in my bag. But that was the one that revolutionized modal jazz and chord progressions. That spiritual epiphany that he had was the epiphany that laid and sowed the seed for him to eventually write A Love Supreme. He actually puts that record, which is the spiritual jazz record, which is, and I didn't bring it because it's kind of the one that most people have probably heard. And I thought, let's use this as an opportunity to tap into the other sounds, you know? But that was the moment that he became obsessed with this idea of something bigger, something heavier, and being a vessel for that. And it was then that he started also reading Islamic philosophy. It was then that he felt compelled to go and meet Ravi Shankar and started learning about the ragas. And it was through all of that that he ended up writing A Love Supreme. That was the greatest thing that he ever did, and he died 2 years later, having expressed that. And when we were in Philadelphia, me and my mate, last year, we'd done this day, and it was a really mental adventure. Like, we'd basically gone out. I'd done this pitch for the BBC to do this documentary about Marshall Allen. It had gotten to the final round, which was like really amazing, but had my hopes incredibly high. We were down to just the last couple of people. It's going to be a huge thing on BBC Radio 4. And eventually they said no. And basically I was completely distraught because I'd put my heart and soul into it. And I knew that it was an incredible project. So I couldn't understand it, because that was what ended up happening was the other ones that ended up coming and ended up being these stories that had gone on there about kind of like the Tudors and stuff about, like, you know, the Second World War and France and Britain and all of these stuff. And I just thought, like, in this moment, a story like that to go and bring you know, the listenership of the BBC and inspire a young set of people to tell this incredible story of this person who's 100 years old, whose music completely exemplifies like total connection amongst all people. And the beautiful thing about Marshall Allen is every single person who I've told the story about him to, being 100 years old and playing, it doesn't matter how old they are, where they come from, how they look. I've just observed this complete human curiosity in how you can be triple figures and still be alive and be doing your thing. And that's why I thought that was such a powerful story. But anyway, my friend saw me in that state of total, like, I was very upset. And he said, we're going to go and do it ourselves. And I was like, well, do you really mean that? Because don't say it if you don't mean it, because I'm going to get my hopes up. And he said, I mean it, let's do it. And we there was no funding. We weren't sitting on loads of money. We had to both take a break out of whatever we were doing and book this 2 weeks off and put this thing on Instagram. And this radio listener was like, I live in Philadelphia. You guys can crash in on my sofa. So we were like, okay, cool. And, you know, we were on the American Airlines. I finished this gig in Deptford at 3 a.m. and we had a 10 a.m. flight straight over. So I had to go home, drop my records off, pack my clothes, and off we went. And we were on the aeroplane. We'd gone away in Europe together, but the two of us had never gone abroad together as a pair. And so we were like gassed. We were on our way to America. I remember going up to him being like, you know, what have you been saying? He's like, I just watched Barbie. And I was like, I just watched Louis Theroux interviews Dame Judi Dench. And we were like, yeah. And everyone was like, what is wrong with these two guys? Like, they're like little babies. And so anyway, we got there and we got into this place and we had this week, and essentially it was completely down to us to go and find the band. Nobody was doing it for us. There was no media organization. I'd met the double bass player of the Summer Orchestra, Tyler, a couple of years ago in this jazz club called Smalls in New York by complete coincidence. The night that I arrived, and I'd been chatting to the stranger that I met about Summer Orchestra, I went running down the stairs and he was like, did you see the jacket that this guy's wearing? And I was like, no, what is it? And he was like, it says Summer Orchestra. And I was like, what? And I came up and I was like, hang on a minute. Are you Tyler Mitchell? And he was like, yeah. And then we ended up spending so much time together. And now we're actually, you know, quite good friends. He's a nutter, but a great nutter. You've got to be if you're in the Summer Orchestra. And so anyway, I messaged him up and, you know, we kind of timed it so there was a gig and we went over to this gig and Marshall was there and then kind of went in, and then Noel Scott, the baritone sax player, was like, give me loads of money. I know you guys are working for a big media organization. And we were like, no, we're not. We just want to tell the story of Summer and bring it to our generation. And he was like, that's what they all say. But we were like, no, it's actually true. But the kind of compassion that I had in understanding where he came from, in that so many people of that era and background have been exploited by the media. So I kind of understood that. But I was also like, mate, that's just not the case. But how do you communicate that with that sensitivity? It's not easy. So anyway, there was this whole thing about that. One day, I was like to Nick, I was like, mate, let's just do an afternoon at the John Coltrane home. I just want to go and just spend a bit of time outside it. It's never been inhabited since he left in 1958. So, I don't know what the exact situation was going to be, but what I did know was that there's going to be that feeling, right? Nobody's lived there. It's never been changed. It's never been renovated. It's never been knocked down. That is the house. And it's not easy to find. It's not like a kind of memorial. It's not a memorial spot. It's not a museum. And so we were meant to go over to this city that day, this city that everybody told us not to go. It's one of the roughest cities on the East Coast, one of the highest murder rates, called Trenton. And every time we mentioned to anybody, like random people, like, what you got to? We're like, yeah, we're going to Trenton on Tuesday. The cab drivers, they'd be like, you're going to Trenton? They would all, it got comical to the point where we were like, should we actually be going to Trenton? But the way that we both were, we were like, we're definitely going to Trenton now. Like, we need to see what it's all about. So anyway, on the way to the train to get to Trenton, we were like, we'll stop at the Coltrane house. And we kind of went there and we stopped, and there was a little kind of blue post outside and it said, John Coltrane lived here in these years. And then, spent a little moment just sitting on his steps. Because actually, when you look at a lot of the Coltrane photos, he's sitting on steps. I don't know why, but part of me was like, I bet you one of those photos was those steps. And it's kind of, Philadelphia doesn't have much greenery, but it's kind of facing this like golf course and there are these trees over it. I was just like taking it in, and it was just like this really beautiful moment. And then I was like to Nick, do you mind doing a little video of me just outside speaking for a couple of minutes about the historical importance of this? I'm just going to share it online. So he was like, cool, did a little video, and off we went to Trenton. On the train to Trenton, we almost got robbed outside the train station, by the way, by this guy who had a gun. It was mental. And we were like, oh, right, we've not even made it to Trenton yet, but we loved it. And so we're on our way to interview this trumpet player called Michael Ray, who's a joker. But I was watching this video on the train, and you couldn't hear me speaking because the wind was so strong that it had come into my iPhone microphone. And I was so annoyed because I'd spoken so eloquently in like 3 minutes to succinctly really explain the history of Coltrane in that house. And I was like to Nick, I was like, mate, he was like, mate, don't worry, we'll go back tomorrow before we go to see Marshall. I was like, thanks again, Nick, man, I really appreciate it. Anyway, go have that mad day in Trenton, which is, you know what, we had a vibe there. And it was cool, met Michael Ray, the trumpeter for the Summer Orchestra and Kool and the Gang, came back, went to bed. And then before we were going to the Sun Ra house on that day where we needed to get Marshall Allen, basically, we needed to interview him. It was that day that we basically said, hey, let's just stop over quick, jump out of the car, and we'll spend a few minutes, just do the video, because that's all we need to do, and go. So we get there. I'm like to Nick, let's do the video. So Nick gets out, I'm standing in front of the house. I kind of feel even more confident about what I want to say. So I'm like, okay, cool. Looking at the camera, and I'm talking about the story that I just told you. And I'm like, so, it was on the second floor, in the rear bedroom, and you kind of see me pointing up. You watch this video, nothing's changing. And then there's this moment where I'm like, that Coltrane kicked his addiction. And I look up, and in the moment, when you watch this video that I look up, the curtain moves and this figure is in front of and this video is online. You can literally go and look this up later. It's on my Instagram, all the way down. And this figure moves, and I'm like, hang on a minute, wait, what? And then the curtain comes in front, and I'm like, am I bugging out? Or was somebody there? And then we look up again, and this guy kind of comes to the front, looks down, and then pulls the curtain. And I was like, and I wave up, I'm like, sir? And then anyway, I'm like, okay, better continue the history. And at the end, I'm like, oh my God, look, the door's open. And then so I'm like, we'll have to check it out. So we finished the video, and then I'm like about to open the Nick's like, what are you doing, mate? We're in America. Don't open the door like that. Someone will shoot you. I was like, oh yeah, of course. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait outside until whoever's in there comes out. I don't care how long it is. And he was like, we're kind of on a tight schedule. I was like, mate, don't worry. That I feel like we've just got to be here. So he's like, cool. Anyway, like 25 minutes later, he goes on a walk, and then he comes back. Nobody's still come out. 25 minutes later, we hear these footsteps. I hear these footsteps coming out. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I stand up, and suddenly like this door opens, and then this kind of figure comes out. At first, it's like this couple, this black couple, probably in their like 50s, that walk out, quite casually dressed. they're looking at me like, who the hell are you? I'm like trying to work out who they are. And then this kind of like taller white guy, probably in his like 50s as well, in like this grey suit with like this kind of long slick back hair, comes out really tall. And I'm looking at him, he's just like smiling. I'm like, all right. And then this kind of, I don't know, probably like 50 odd year old black guy in this like red and black t-shirt steps out, kind of got like a slightly suspicious look, looking at me like what am I doing? And I'm looking at him, and he's wearing a John Coltrane, Miles Davis t-shirt, funnily enough, because I just talked about that story. And I was in my Sun Ra t-shirt. It was just mad energies at this moment. And it was the first t-shirt wear the day of the year. I remember that really crucially. First day where I was in no second layer. And I brought it, but I'd taken it off. And it was in that moment that I'm like, so, what are you doing here? And he was like, what do you mean, what? And I'm like, hang on a minute. You're Ravi Coltrane. You're the son of John and Alice Coltrane. And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, no. And he's like, who are you? I'm like, I'm Haseeb. And he was like, what are you doing on what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, we've just come over from London to kind of explore the jazz history of Philadelphia. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And then I was like, what are you doing here? And he was like, well, it's kind of weird that you've caught us here because we've just had the first meeting we've had in years. And it's me, the Coltrane, where's some of the Coltrane family, this guy who's the head of the landlord, and then Kathy, who's this other lady who kind of comes out, who's the head of the John Coltrane estate. And he's like, we've just had a meeting about maybe opening this house up as a public museum in 3 years' time because it's just not been inhabited for the last 50 years. I literally feel like I'm going to faint at this moment. I'm like, wait, what? He was like, yeah, this was just like the first meeting we've had in years. And the moment that you pointed up happened to be the moment that we arrived at the window, which you can see in the iPhone video, that had it been 20 seconds earlier, we would have never known. Nobody would have been there. Anyway, I'm then bugging. He's like, so what do you want? Because I'm just kind of standing there, in complete shock. And I'm like, is there any way we can have a tour of the house? And he's like, get out of here, man. Like, no way. He was like, nobody outside of the Coltrane family has ever stepped into this house. And I was like, I just really want to see the second floor rare bedroom where John Coltrane kicked his heroin addiction by locking himself in there for 2 weeks after he got kicked out of Miles Davis's band and had a spiritual epiphany that made him write Love Supreme and go to New York. And he's like, how the hell do you know that? And I was like, I just love your dad. I love your dad so much. And he was like, but then I could see he was considering it. So then I was like, oh, no way. And then I was like, oh man, please. And then he looks over at Kathy and I'm like, Kathy. And then she's like, she's there looking at it and they're like, well, no one's ever come in here before. And then he's like, be quick. And we're like, no way. And then they're like, you are the first people outside of the Coltrane family to ever step into this house. And then I was like, no way. And then I was like, can we film it? And he was like, on a phone, but not on the camera. And I was like, no way he said that. I thought he was going to say no. And so I've never shared this video because I don't know how to share it without kind of, you can't minimize it by posting it on Instagram. Maybe I've got to put it on YouTube and be like, make the title, ask me about the story, because it's mad. And so we went up, when we went in this house and we went past the bookshelf with all the books and up this kind of staircase and into the bathroom, and I'm touching the taps and obviously no water's coming out. And we go past the bathroom and we go into that second floor rear bedroom, and they're old family photos that are put up against the kind of windowsill. And there's the bed and there's a music stand and there's the window, and there are the train tracks going to New York, the actual train tracks that gave him that spiritual epiphany. And we were just bugging out. And it's basically a 2-minute video of me bugging the hell out and Ravi Coltrane finding me a bit annoying, and then us getting down to the bottom and me being cheeky enough to ask for a souvenir and him being like, you are too cheeky, get out, you just got the souvenir. And then we stayed in touch and they were like, do you think that you could be a good person to kind of share the Coltrane story with the younger generation? And I was like, yeah. And then they were like, okay, we'll get your details and maybe we'll be in touch. They've not been in touch yet, actually, but they're working on maybe opening this up as a museum. So that is basically what happened there. And all of those energies are totally mad. And I know, I'm sorry I just spoke for a long time, but I had to tell you guys that, right? Isn't it? Anyway, so all right, let me play another tune. On the topic of Coltrane, Alice Coltrane and Joe Henderson, amazing record, 1973, I think this one came out on Milestone. And this is just, this is a very forgotten record. This is another one that got 2 stars by the Rolling Stone because they didn't get it. And it's called The Elements, and the songs are called Fire, Air, Water and Earth. And this is my favorite song on the record, and it's called Fire. and it's an incredible, explosive coming together, and it's a great song to draw to. If you ever want to draw, you should draw to this. The incredible sounds of Joe Henderson and Alice Coltrane. Another song that goes on, but I want to squeeze in one more before we finish up. That was the quickest hour and a half. Oh my gosh, I've got to do it all over again, but I'm used to it. I do that every time, so it should be good. But yeah, you should check out that whole album if you want, and they're all just incredible, rippling, beautiful songs that really channel the spirit. And of course, after John Coltrane died, Alice and Pharaoh took that forward in their own ways, and of course worked together a lot and became this kind of partnership and dedicated a lot of the work that they did to John Coltrane and his philosophy. And just before we round up, I'm going to play one final little short tune before I say goodbye. This is a really special record that I found in Human Head Records. Clifford Jordan, These Are My Roots. This isn't a white label. This isn't like, a test pressing. This is the test pressing. This was the record that was used In the studio, they've written on it, Clifford Jordan, they've put the code, they've stamped the date, August the 27th, 1965, Carnival weekend. And they've got side 1 and side 2, and you've got his handwriting on the back, writing all of the things. And Clifford Jordan played with John Gilmore, who of course played with Art Blakey and Summer Orchestra. And I mean, that Clifford Jordan he probably played with Coltrane. Anyway, the singer on this is an amazing singer. There's nothing written about her online. Her name's Sandra Douglass, and she sings on 2 of the tracks, and they're the 2 best tracks. And this is it Lead Belly or Lead Belly? Lead Belly, because I've done that wrong on radio. But you know when you do it wrong and then you don't remember which way wrong you did it? Yeah, and then you're just never gonna remember. I'm gonna have to ask the same in the next session. Lead Belly, all right, I'm gonna remember like pencil, lead, and he led the movement. Lead Belly. No, but then lead, you can still lead the movement. That doesn't work. Pencil, I'm gonna go with the pencil one. All right, so just to finish it off, which one do I wanna play? Take This Hammer, yeah, cool. And this is an old blues song, an old slave song, but they kind of reinterpreted this in the 60s during the civil rights movement, during this era of spiritual jazz. And yeah, this is a completely stunning track, and it's very impossible to find even online. I need to really start this at the right moment so you can hear it all.
Take this hammer, get to the captain. Take this hammer, get to the captain. Take this hammer, get to the captain. Tell him I'm gone, boy. Tell him that I'm gone. And if he asks you, will I run in? If he asks you, will I run take this hammer, carry to the captain. Take this hammer, carry to the captain. Take this
Wow. Stunning piece of music. So emotional. And yeah, her name's Sandra Douglass. And, you know, that's the only thing that she's been listed as recording on. And there's nothing really, oh no, don't want to put it in that one. And there's nothing really about her that's been written. But of course she lives on through that amazing music. And that's a very special piece of wax that, of course, from Human Head Records, that I was able to get, an artifact actually that should be in a museum. And this is a museum really. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, guys. It's been, Take the Hammer. Yeah. It was actually in the album, These Are My Roots, 1965, Clifford Jordan plays Lead Belly. But yeah, no, it's been such a joy, guys. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface. I actually can't believe that there's like, I could do like a 3-month session, do you know what I mean? Like seminars with breaks. But yeah, it's been such a joy to deliver this session on the final evening of my residency here for this year before we continue next year. So I just want to say a big thank you to Alex, to Pav, to Alicia, the whole 180 team for being behind this and for kind of pushing it forward and managing it with such love. I'm so grateful. And thank you to all of you guys for coming out, for being here to engage with the stories and sounds in this way. Yeah, it means a lot. So yeah, I've been Haseeb Iqbal, Spiritual Jazz Special. Thank you very much. Thank you.